The twin moons hung over the virile capital like watchful eyes as night settled across the silver towers, and in the quiet hum of the great city something uneasy moved beneath the surface, a tension that most citizens could feel but never name. Because in this empire every heartbeat obeyed the season law, a rule so old and so sacred that none dared question it, a law that controlled when people could love, when they could touch, when they could bring new life into their world, a law designed to keep passion caged and stability in place. Yet tonight the palace corridors whispered with a different kind of fear, one born not from ritual but from the arrival of a being who lived outside every rule they had ever known. A human. Princess Leora walked through the grand medical hall with her long silver cloak brushing the polished floor, her steps light but her heart heavy, because the council had summoned her to examine something that was already causing tremors in the highest chambers of power. They wanted her to study the human prisoner brought from the border conflict, a soldier captured in a flash skirmish, a man whose biology had shocked the imperial doctors so deeply that some fainted and others called him a living threat. Leora did not understand how a single soldier could frighten the Empire, but she felt a strange pull inside her chest, something telling her that whatever she was about to see would change her life forever. The doors to the examination chamber opened with a soft hydraulic sigh, revealing a circular room washed in pale blue light. And there he stood at the center, wrists bound with luminous restraints, posture straight, eyes calm, a man who looked like he had faced storms far harsher than this moment. Sergeant Mason Hale, human soldier of Earth, his dark hair messy from battle, his uniform torn but his expression steady. He did not look broken. He looked aware, patient, almost curious, as if he were studying them while they studied him. And when Leora stepped closer, he lifted his gaze and their eyes met. And in that instant her breath caught as if the world had paused to listen. "Princess Leora," the chief biologist whispered, sliding a glowing data tablet into her hands. "This human possesses no mating season. He is fertile all year, every day, without exception, just like every human male. Their species can choose love anytime they wish. It is chaos, dangerous chaos." Leora scanned the data, her eyes widening slowly as line after line revealed numbers and chemical rhythms that defied everything she had been raised to believe. Compared to her own people who bonded only when the law allowed it, compared to other species who waited entire cycles for the one season when their bodies aligned, humans lived in a state of constant readiness, constant possibility, constant freedom. It felt impossible. Yet the proof glowed in her hands, undeniable. She approached Mason cautiously, her voice soft but firm as she spoke, asking him why humans lived this way, why they existed outside the seasonal rules that her people believed were necessary to maintain order. And Mason answered with a calm certainty, saying that on Earth love was not a storm to be controlled but a choice, a responsibility, a bond built slowly and kept through loyalty, faith and intention. His voice was low and steady, carrying a warmth that made Leora feel as if something old inside her had just woken up from a long sleep. The advisors around her murmured in fear, calling humans unpredictable, unstable, creatures who lived too close to passion. But Leora saw something very different. She saw a being capable of depth, not recklessness, and the more she looked at him, the more she felt a strange warmth rising through her, a pull she could not explain, a resonance she had never felt with any member of her own species, a spark she tried to ignore but could not deny. Whispers reached her from the council chambers, warnings that if the public learned the truth about humans, entire districts might riot, couples might question the law, families might demand freedom. The regent believed this man's biology could shatter the cultural foundation of the empire, and that fear alone made Mason's fate uncertain. Leora sensed the storm gathering around him, and the weight of the empire pressed on her shoulders like invisible chains. She ordered a private scan despite the chief biologist's hesitation, wanting to understand the deeper reaction her body felt near him. And when the results appeared on the hologram, her pulse quickened, her breath sharpened because she saw something impossible. Her physiology showed a rare match marker, a once-in-a-millennium resonance between two living beings, a myth whispered in old songs, a connection said to appear only when fate itself intervened, and it was happening between her and the human soldier. Fear and wonder tangled inside her as she stared at the glowing results, her thoughts spiraling through confusion and awe. This match could get her executed or exiled if revealed. It could mark her as a traitor to her own bloodline. Yet she could not bring herself to step away from Mason. Something about him made her feel seen, as if he were looking past the title of princess, past the weight of her duty, into the core of who she truly was. And then, under the pale lights, Mason spoke again. not with fear but with a quiet strength, telling her of a human couple he once saw on Earth. Two people who chose each other every single day through storms, seasons, and years, not because they were forced by nature or law, but because they believed love was something worth defending, worth standing guard for, worth bleeding for. And the softness in his voice sank into Leora's heart like a seed waiting to bloom, as she turned to leave, troubled and captivated at the same time. The High Regent's enforcer entered the room, a tall figure dressed in obsidian armor, announcing that the Council would decide the humans' fate at dawn, and that the Empire could not risk a creature whose existence threatened the season law itself. The words echoed through the chamber like a cold wind, and Leora realized something with a sharp, painful clarity. If the Council feared Mason this much, they would not keep him alive, and if she did nothing, the man who had spoken to her with honesty and calmness would not see another sunrise. She stepped out into the corridor, her heartbeat unsteady, her mind storming with questions and fear and a strange fierce protectiveness that surprised even her, because for the first time in her life, she felt the edges of the cage she had been born into, and now she knew its walls were real, unyielding, and built on ancient lies, and somewhere deep inside her a spark flared brighter than fear, telling her that this human soldier was not the threat. He was the key, and that her life, her destiny, and perhaps the future of her entire world had just begun to shift in ways no one could stop now. Night pressed against the palace like a silent tide as Princess Leora walked through the dim corridors with her thoughts tangled, her pulse unsteady, and a strange heat rising inside her every time she remembered the way the human soldier had looked at her. It was not fear or defiance or obedience. It was something gentler, something honest, something she was not used to feeling from anyone inside the rigid walls of the Empire. She kept replaying his words in her mind, the idea that love could be chosen, not controlled, and the way he had spoken of Earth couples who walked through life together by decision, rather than by season. And something inside her longed for that freedom without understanding why. The palace felt different tonight. Shadows sharper, air cooler, guards restless, almost as if the walls themselves were aware of the danger inside their chambers. Because the Empire did not fear armies or weapons. It feared ideas, it feared change, and the human was both. Leora slipped through the scanning wing and entered the private observation room, where she could see Mason through a transparent barrier. Sitting calmly in his cell with his hands resting on his knees and his gaze lowered as if he were meditating, the blue lights around him pulsed with a rhythmic hum, but he seemed untouched by it. Steady like a mountain in the middle of a storm, she hesitated before entering, her fingers brushing the cold access panel, wondering if she was breaking a rule she had lived under her whole life, wondering if a single conversation could really shift the course of destiny. But when the door opened and she stepped inside, Mason looked up and the quiet in his eyes pulled her closer without effort. She carried a small container of warm broth meant for prisoners with sensitive biology, and when she placed it on the bench he gave her a faint smile, not grateful in a desperate way but thankful in a human way, a gesture so small yet so disarming that Leora felt her chest tighten. She asked him softly if he feared what the Council might decide, and Mason shook his head with a calm she did not expect, saying fear was natural but surrender was a choice, saying he had seen worse fates than death, saying he did not fear their judgment as much as he feared becoming a monster in their stories, and his voice carried a kind of courage that made Leora feel strangely fragile, as if her world of rules and seasons suddenly looked smaller compared to the vastness of what humans held inside them. She confessed that she had run more scans, that she had found a rare resonance between their biologies, something ancient and forbidden, and Mason went quiet for a long moment, his expression softening as he studied her face. He did not mock her belief in such myths nor question the science behind it. He simply said that sometimes two lives move toward each other like rivers heading for the same sea, and even if the world tries to dam them, they still find a way to meet. The words sank deep into her like a warm current, and she found herself unable to step back from him even though danger pressed against her every breath. Outside the palace window, distant shouts echoed through the lower districts. News had leaked about the human's abilities, rumors spreading like wildfire that he was a creature without restraint, that his species lived in endless desire, that the season law might collapse if the truth reached the masses. Some feared freedom while others longed for it, and the tension rose like a storm waiting to break over the city. Leora sensed it all building around Mason as if he were the center of a gravity, well pulling the Empire into a new future, one it was not ready to accept. She felt someone watching her long before the sound of armor reached her ears, and when she turned she saw Marshal Kalor's reflection in the glass, tall, cold, wrapped in black ceremonial plating that swallowed the light around him, his golden eyes narrowing with suspicion as he stepped forward, demanding to know why she was visiting the prisoner again. His tone sharp with unspoken judgment, Leora lied with calmness she did not feel, saying she was simply completing her scientific duties. But Kalor's stare dug into her like a blade, sensing the shift inside her even if he could not name it. When he left with a quiet threat lingering in the air, Mason asked her if she trusted the people around her, and she admitted she did not know anymore. The Empire valued obedience, not truth, and she had spent her whole life believing the law protected them. But now she could see how much it imprisoned them. Mason listened without interrupting, his silence full of understanding, and when she finally looked at him, he lifted his hand slightly as if offering just the echo of a gesture, a space she could step into or walk away from, a choice she had never been given before. She placed her hand in his, and the warmth that flowed between them felt like the world holding its breath, like something rare and forbidden had awakened in the quiet of the night, a spark she could not deny no matter how hard she tried. He closed his fingers gently around hers and taught her the human promise grip, a gesture of trust where two people lock hands not out of duty, but out of shared intention. The moment felt almost sacred, and Leora's heart trembled with something she did not have a word for yet. Outside the walls, the unrest grew louder, citizens demanding answers about the human, about the law, about their own freedom, fires flickering in the distant markets where dissent spread, and the High Regent's speeches failed to calm them as panic clawed at the foundation of the Empire. Leora realized the human was no longer just a prisoner. He was a symbol, a spark that could ignite liberation or destruction depending on who held the torch, and she knew the Council would choose fear over truth. When she returned to her chamber, she found a secret message glowing on her personal console, a short line written in the Regent's unmistakable code, informing her that Sergeant Mason Hale would be executed at dawn to protect the season law from collapse. The words hit her like a blade of ice, cutting through her ribs, stealing her breath, and she sank onto her seat with trembling hands, because she knew what the Council feared was not the human body, but the human heart, and now they intended to silence both forever. As the moonlight spilled across her floor, she closed her eyes, feeling the Empire shifting around her like a beast stirring in sleep, and she whispered to herself a truth she could no longer ignore. If she did nothing, Mason would die, and her people would remain trapped in a cage built long before she was born. And as her hands clenched into fists, she felt something inside her break open, a resolve sharper than fear, telling her that she had one night left to decide whether she would obey the law or rewrite destiny itself. The desert wind roared against the outer walls of the palace as midnight drew closer, and Princess Leora moved through hidden corridors with her hood drawn low, her heartbeat thundering like a warning drum inside her chest, every step reminding her that dawn was no longer a distant line on the horizon, but a blade hanging over the human soldier's life. She kept seeing the execution order glowing on her console, kept hearing the Regent's cold words repeating in her mind as if they were carved into her bones. And beneath all those fears rose a fiercer truth. She was not going to let Mason die, not while breath still lived in her body. She slipped into a forgotten service chamber where Captain Wren waited, leaning against a wall with bandages peeking from under his uniform, his face bruised from an earlier fight, but his sharp eyes full of loyalty. When Leora told him the plan, his expression tightened with disbelief. Yet he did not refuse her. He never refused her. He simply asked how far she was willing to go, and when she answered everything without hesitation, he nodded with a grim kind of pride that made her chest ache, because he knew the weight she carried and how much this choice would change her life. Aisha arrived moments later, small, quick, brilliant, her fingers stained with data ink, her gaze flicking nervously between Leora and Rin. She had hacked security seals before, but never for a crime against the Empire, never for something punishable by erasure. Yet when Leora placed her trembling hand over hers and whispered, "Please," Aisha swallowed her fear and agreed. Because some bonds formed not from season or law, but from loyalty deeper than blood. And tonight that loyalty demanded the unthinkable. Elder Mara stepped from the shadows last, her silver hair loose, her robes plain, her presence calming like a guiding star. She had spent decades studying forbidden truths about the Empire, truths that whispered of a world before the season law, a world where love had danced freely under the twin moons before fear chained it. She looked at Leora with an ancient sadness, telling her that destiny had chosen this moment long before any of them were born, that some stories demanded courage even when the cost was unimaginable, and Leora felt the tremble in her heart settle into steel. Together they moved like ghosts through the palace underbelly, passing old machinery, forgotten archives, and silent tunnels glowing with faint blue lanterns. The plan was dangerous and delicate, a combination of hacked access panels, forged guard rotations, and timed electrical pulses that would freeze surveillance long enough to reach Mason's cell. The deeper they went, the louder Leora's heartbeat grew, each step pushing her closer to a future she could not fully see, yet something inside her urged her forward, a pull stronger than fear, stronger than caution, stronger than the Empire itself. When they reached the detention hall, the air felt colder. Heavy with dread, 2 elite guards patrolled the entrance, armored in obsidian plates and carrying shock rifles that could drop an adult warrior in a heartbeat. Aisha pressed against the wall and whispered into her wrist console, her fingers flying across glowing symbols. A soft pulse hummed through the hall and the lights flickered. The guards blinked as their visors clouded with static. Their weapons losing power for a few precious seconds, Rin moved with silent speed, disarming them with clean precision and dragging them into an alcove before they could cry out. Leora felt a shiver of guilt at their unconscious forms, but she pushed it away. This was the price of saving an innocent life. The cell door slid open with a soft hiss, and Mason rose the moment he saw her, his eyes widening, not in surprise but in a quiet recognition, as if he had known she would come. She stepped inside quickly, telling him there was no time, telling him the council planned to execute him at dawn, telling him she would not allow it. His expression softened with a warmth that made her chest tighten, and he thanked her, not with desperation but with a kind of respect she rarely received even from her own people. But when she urged him to flee with them through the escape tunnels, Mason stopped her with a gentle but unyielding steadiness, asking her if this was truly her choice or if she felt forced by fear. His voice was calm even as alarms began to flicker red in the distance. He told her he would not be the cause of her downfall unless she chose this path freely, and his words struck her deeper than any weapon. Because no one had ever asked her what she wanted. Not truly, not honestly. And in that moment she realized the truth forming inside her from the first moment she heard his voice. She wanted him to live, she wanted him free. She wanted to stand beside him even if the world burned for it. She took his hand and squeezed it in the promise grip he had taught her, her voice trembling but certain as she said she chose him. She chose this. She chose the truth over the lies she had been raised to obey. Mason nodded with a fierce tenderness, and the two of them stepped into the corridor together. As the emergency lights strobed across the walls like flashes of lightning, the Empire waking to their betrayal, alarms roared through the halls as they ran, Aisha guiding them through twists and hidden stairwells, Rin clearing the path with quiet brutality, Elder Mara whispering directions from forgotten maps stored only in her mind. The palace breathed like a wounded beast around them, guards scrambling, sirens wailing, and everywhere the sound of metal doors slamming into place as systems tried to trap them inside. They reached the maintenance tram suspended above the neon-lit city, wind howling through the open rails. Rin slammed the release switch and the tram lurched forward into the night, racing across glowing highways and shadowed domes below. Leora clutched the railing as heat from energy blasts streaked past them, palace drones chasing from behind with sharp metallic screeches, the city spreading out like a constellation beneath their feet. As they neared the outer sector, a barricade rose ahead, metal blades crossing the track like the teeth of a monster waiting to consume them. Mason grabbed Leora and held her steady as Rin shouted for everyone to brace. The tram smashed through the barricade in an explosion of sparks and shattered metal, the entire vehicle shaking violently as it plunged off the main line and dropped into the dark open desert beyond the city's final wall. Wind roared around them. Sand spiraled upward in a blinding storm. And the last thing Leora saw before the world blurred was Mason pulling her close, his voice steady even in the chaos, telling her to hold on, because the real danger, the real truth, the real fight was only beginning now. The desert swallowed them whole as the tram wrecked into the dunes, metal screeching against sand, sparks flying into the night like dying stars. And when everything finally stopped moving, Princess Leora lay against Mason's chest, his arms wrapped around her protectively as dust drifted around them like a trembling cloud. Her heartbeat hammered in her ears, but she was alive, he was alive, and for a moment the world felt eerily still, as if the desert itself watched them with ancient eyes. The capital city a distant glow behind them, shrinking with every breath she took. When she pulled herself upright, the cold desert wind cut across her skin, carrying the scent of dry stone and distant storms. Dunes stretched endlessly under the twin moons, glowing faintly with bioluminescent dust that shimmered each time the wind shifted. Strange flowers pulsed with blue light near the broken tram, their petals unfolding lazily like creatures waking from sleep. It was beautiful and unsettling all at once. A place whispered about in childhood stories but never seen up close. A land where lost travelers vanished and where ancient spirits were said to roam. Mason checked Rin's wounds quickly, his hands steady even though blood stained the captain's armor. Rin grunted that he was fine, refusing to slow them down. Isha crawled from the wreckage with her console half shattered but still glowing, muttering that she could reroute signals if she had a few minutes. Elder Mara remained calm as always, brushing sand from her robes and scanning the horizon with eyes that had seen too many forgotten truths. Leora felt surrounded by courage, yet a cold ache pressed inside her when she remembered the Empire's response. She knew they wouldn't rest now, not after this escape, not after she openly defied the season law and stole the human prisoner with her own hands, and she was right. Because moments later the quiet night trembled with a mechanical whine as red lights flickered overhead. The chase drones had found their trail, sleek silver machines gliding across the dunes like hungry predators, their wings slicing through the wind with lethal grace. Kalor's voice echoed through one of their speakers, cold and sharp, telling her that running would only make the punishment worse, that the Empire would purge entire districts if necessary to preserve the law. And the threat made Leora's blood run cold. She knew how far the Regent would go to protect the illusion of order, and the idea of innocent people suffering because of her choices tore at her heart. Mason stepped in front of her instinctively, his body angling as if to shield her from the sound alone, and something about that small movement deepened the quiet bond forming between them. She had never known someone who moved to protect her without being commanded or trained to do so. He did it because he cared, because he believed she was worth protecting, because the connection between them was real even if neither had fully spoken it aloud yet. And when he met her gaze in the pale moonlight, she saw not fear but certainty, a strength that grounded her even as the desert around them shook with danger. They fled deeper into the dunes, their footsteps slipping on shifting sands as the night wind howled like an ancient creature calling out warnings. Aisha jammed the drone signals with quick bursts from her damaged console, static rippling across the sky as the machines faltered for a few seconds, long enough for the group to slide down a steep dune and take shelter in a narrow canyon, glowing with soft blue moss. The light bathed their faces in ghostly patterns, painting them like figures from an old legend. Leora felt her breath slow as they hid under the natural stone arch, but her nerves remained sharp. Knowing the reprieve was temporary as they rested, Mason taught her how to listen for movement in the sand, how to tell the difference between wind and something alive, how humans survived deserts on Earth by reading shadows and using starlight as a guide. His voice was calm and practical, but beneath the words she heard an undercurrent of something gentle, something that made her chest warm. She taught him in return how to interpret the glowing plants, how their flicker changed when storms approached or when predators lurked nearby, their knowledge weaving together like two halves of a path neither could walk alone. Hours later, Elder Mara revealed something that made the air in the canyon tighten. She told them the truth she had kept hidden for years, that the season law was not sacred nor ancient, but engineered long ago by rulers who feared that free love and free choice would make citizens impossible to control. She spoke of secret archives she had uncovered, of stolen records showing couples punished for loving outside permitted cycles, of rebellions that the Empire silenced by rewriting biology and culture into something caged. Leora felt fury rise inside her like a storm. The lies she had believed all her life now shattered like glass beneath her feet. She saw the Empire not as a guardian but as a jailer, and she felt a fierce desire to break every chain it had ever forged. The wind shifted again, carrying the low hum of engines in the far distance. Kalor's forces were regrouping, the hunt tightening with every passing minute. And just when Leora felt her hope wavering, Isha's console crackled softly, releasing a faint but unmistakable signal. It was an Earth frequency, a coded distress channel. Mason froze, his eyes widening as he realized what it meant. A human relief ship had received his captured soldier ID, and they were searching for him somewhere in the outer orbit lanes. The possibility felt like a spark of salvation in the darkness, but Leora's heart twisted painfully as she understood the choice standing before her. If Mason reached that ship, he could escape this world forever. He could survive, he could be free. But if she went with him, she would abandon her people to a future ruled by fear and lies. And if she stayed, she would stand alone against the Empire's wrath without the one person who made her feel alive. The desert wind carried her silence as she wrestled with the truth inside her. And when she finally met Mason's eyes, her voice cracked with sorrow and strength mixed together. She told him she would return to the capital to fight the law, not because she was unafraid, but because she could not watch her world stay broken. She promised she would see this through even if no one else believed in her. Mason's expression softened into something heartbreakingly proud, and he placed his hand over hers in the promise grip once more, telling her he would not leave her to walk this path alone. And in that moment, under the blue glow of alien moss and the howl of distant engines closing in, Leora felt destiny shift again, sharper and heavier, as the coming storm gathered around them, ready to decide the future of her world with fire, courage, and choices that could not be undone. Dawn approached like a slow-rising ember, its pale light spreading across the desert as Princess Leora and her companions made their hidden journey back toward the capital, each step heavy with purpose and danger, the sand still cold under their feet and the wind carrying the faint echo of distant engines hunting for them. The sky glowed soft pink as if the world were holding its breath for what was about to unfold, and Leora felt the weight of destiny settle deeper into her bones. She knew the coming hours would decide the future of her people, but she also knew she was not the same woman who had lived inside the palace walls a day ago. She had touched freedom, she had seen truth, she had felt something real in the warmth of a human soldier's hand. And now she walked forward not as a princess following orders, but as a leader ready to defy an empire built on fear. The secret tunnels beneath the capital welcomed them with cold stone and flickering lights, their shadows long and uneasy on the damp ground. Elder Mara guided them with memories of old maps burned into her mind, her steps steady despite her age. Aisha whispered updates as she intercepted reports from the outer districts, rumors spreading fast that the princess had turned traitor, that the human was a monster, that the season law was in danger of collapsing. The words carried fear, anger, hope, and chaos all swirling together like a storm that no longer listened to its masters. And Leora felt her heart tighten each time she heard her own name twisted by the Empire's lies. They emerged near the lower chambers of the palace, the air vibrating with tension as guards rushed through the halls, orders echoing from chamber to chamber. It felt like the Empire was cracking from within, and in the center of that trembling fear, Leora stepped forward with calm. She had already invoked the ancient right of trial of law earlier, through a secret transmission before leaving the desert, a right the regent could not legally refuse without exposing his tyranny. And as they reached the Hall of Echoes, she saw citizens gathering, their faces worried, curious, desperate for truth. The arena at the center glowing with rising light as it prepared for the trial that no one expected to ever see in their lifetime. Mason walked beside her, his presence grounding her as they stepped into the open arena, the murmurs of thousands swirling around them like a living sea. Some eyes filled with awe at the sight of the human standing beside their princess, others filled with fear or confusion, but all of them watching with breathless attention. The High Regent sat upon the elevated throne carved from shimmering crystal, his expression tight and controlled, his enforcers flanking him like sculpted shadows, and Leora felt his gaze pierce through her like a blade dipped in poison. He did not greet her. He did not acknowledge her right. He simply stared as if daring her to step wrong. Leora stepped into the center of the arena, her voice steady as she demanded the trial of law be honored, her words carrying through the chamber with a clarity that silenced every whisper. She spoke of the season law, of its foundations, of its purpose twisted over centuries, of the truths Elder Mara uncovered buried deep beneath layers of lies. She spoke of choice, freedom, and dignity stolen from generations. She spoke of how love had been turned into a scheduled ritual instead of a living bond. Her voice trembled only once when she spoke of the match resonance she found between herself and Mason, a truth she knew could shake every heart watching, because it was a reminder that destiny sometimes ignored walls, rules, and empires to connect two souls that were never meant to be separate. The regent responded with fury wrapped in calmness, calling her naive, accusing her of being manipulated by the human, twisting her compassion into weakness, painting Mason as a seductive danger meant to unravel their sacred order. He displayed edited footage showing humans as violent, showing Mason captured in battle without context, twisting the truth into fear that seeped into the crowd like a creeping shadow. Kaelor stood beside him, armored in obsidian, his expression carved from stone, yet something behind his eyes flickered with conflict, a war inside him between loyalty and truth. Then Mason stepped forward, his voice quiet but strong enough to reach every corner of the arena. He spoke not with anger but with sincerity, explaining human biology not as chaos but as responsibility, explaining that humans loved freely not because they lacked discipline, but because they believed love was a promise. not a season. He told them that his people chose their partners daily, year after year, season after season, not because nature forced them, but because their hearts did. His words carried something the Empire had long forgotten, something simple and powerful, something true, and the crowd fell into a hushed stillness that felt like the world holding its breath. Leora watched as faces in the audience softened, eyes widening, minds shifting, seeds of doubt forming in hearts that had been caged by the law all their lives. One voice rose from the stands calling out the forbidden phrase, "Year-round heart," another joined, then another, until hundreds echoed it together. Their voices rising like a wave shaking the very foundation of the hall. The regent's face darkened with rage, his control slipping. And in that crack of his mask, Leora saw the Empire's greatest fear. Not the human soldier, not the science he carried, but the truth that people were beginning to remember they had the right to choose whom and when to love. The High Regent slammed his hand onto the throne's control panel, voiding the trial with a single command, declaring the arena under emergency lockdown, ordering the arrest of Leora, Mason, and everyone who aided them. Armed soldiers charged forward with weapons drawn. The hall gasped in fear as the fragile hope of the moment shattered into chaos. But before the soldiers reached them, the ceiling shuddered with thunder as massive shadows descended outside the crystal dome. Earth dropships streaking through the sky like silver comets. The crowd froze in awe and terror as the ships hovered above, their engines roaring with authority, and in the chaos the palace turrets activated, firing glowing blasts as the shield crackled to life around the capital. The sky lit up with the first sparks of war as Mason grabbed Leora's hand, pulling her close, telling her the fight was far from over, that they had awakened something the Empire could no longer bury. And as the shield trembled under the force of the first earth strike, Leora realized the truth sinking deep into her chest. The battle for choice, for freedom, for destiny itself had begun, and there was no turning back now. The sky burned like a wounded star as the first earth strike hit the capital shield, sending ripples of golden light across the dome that protected the palace, and the shockwave rolled through the Hall of Echoes like a thunderous heartbeat that rattled every pillar and shook every terrified breath. Princess Leora stood frozen for a moment beside Mason as the crowd scattered in panic, their screams mixing with the roar of engines and the violent crackle of weapons firing outside. Yet in all that chaos she felt strangely calm, because she had known this moment was coming, the moment when truth and fear would collide, when the Empire's lies would be forced into the open, when choice itself would become a battlefield soaked in fire and courage. Mason tightened his grip on her hand and pulled her away from the charging guards just as a blast shattered part of the balcony above them, shards of crystal raining down like falling stars. Captain Rin appeared from the smoke with his blade drawn, blood staining his uniform but his eyes fierce with loyalty, shouting that 2 shield pylons were still exposed on the north and east towers, that if they could disable them the Earth ships could land without burning half the city. Leora felt her pulse surge. She knew the choice before them was no longer simply survival, but a turning point that could save thousands of innocent lives trapped beneath the dome. Aisha sprinted toward the command corridors, her fingers already dancing over her cracked console to scramble palace communications, every spark of her screen lighting her face with determination and fear. Elder Mara moved with surprising strength for her age, her voice calm amid the storm as she directed civilians to safety, urging them down hidden passages only she remembered. Leora saw in her the kind of leader her empire should have had, someone who guided with truth instead of control, someone who healed instead of silenced, and the sight filled her heart with quiet resolve even as explosions shook the palace foundations. Mason led a small group of rebel guards through the inner gardens toward the east tower, the air thick with burning smoke and drifting embers that danced like angry fireflies around them. Each step was a race against time as drones swooped overhead, firing precision rounds that scorched the marble paths. Rin charged ahead with a roar, blocking a drone's blade with his arm shield and cutting through its core with a single sweeping strike. Sparks exploded across his armor, but he pushed forward with the strength of someone fighting not just for a cause but for redemption. Each breath ragged from old wounds, yet each step unwavering. Inside the east tower, a narrow bridge stretched across a reactor pit, glowing with swirling energy, the entire structure trembling as power surged to maintain the shield. Kaelor stood at the far end, his dark armor gleaming with the shimmer of emergency lights, his expression a storm of rage and sorrow mixed into something hollow and painful. He stepped forward with measured steps, blocking their path with a silent oath that carried years of buried grief. Mason approached him slowly, his voice steady even as the air crackled with tension, saying they didn't have to fight. saying there was still time to choose truth over fear, saying no heart deserved to live in chains forever. Kalor lifted his blade with hands that shook almost imperceptibly, and Leora saw something break behind his golden eyes as he whispered that he once loved someone outside the permitted season, that the law took her away, that obeying the Empire was the only way he knew to survive that pain, and the weight of his confession pressed the air heavy around them. Mason's voice softened, telling him that the person he lost would not have wanted the world to bleed because of old wounds, telling him that loyalty built on fear was not loyalty at all, telling him there was still a path to become the man he wished he had been. Their blades met in a clash that echoed through the tower like thunder, sparks leaping into the air as they fought across the trembling bridge. Their movements fierce but not fueled by hatred, rather by clashing truths and broken pasts. Leora watched with her breath held tight against her ribs, knowing this moment was bigger than combat. It was a test of hearts, a test of what her world would become if no one dared to choose differently. Mason finally disarmed Kalor, sending the blade clattering across the floor. But instead of striking him down, he offered his hand, steady and open, a gesture of mercy that struck deeper than any wound. Kalor stared at him, breathing hard, his expression trembling between anger and collapse, and then something inside him gave way as he lowered his head in silent surrender. He stepped aside and turned his key, deactivating his tower's shield relay, the room shaking as energy levels dropped with a hum that vibrated through the floor. Leora rushed to the North Tower with Aisha and Rin, fighting through guards who no longer knew whether to obey their leaders or protect the truth rising from the chaos. Inside the second tower, she placed her trembling hands on the override panel, her heart pounding with fear and hope. Tangled together, and as she turned the key, the shield flickered violently, collapsing in a cascade of golden light that dissolved into the sky above the city like shattered dawn. Earth medics and rescue teams descended from the ships not as conquerors, but as relief, rushing to help civilians trapped under debris, offering water, bandages, calm voices, their presence a living contradiction to the lies the Regent had spread. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Mason helped Rin pull a wounded guard from a fallen beam, their roles dissolving into something new, something human, something united, and Leora felt the shift ripple through the air like the beginning of a new heartbeat, the first breath of a world awakening from centuries of control. But before she could take that breath for herself, a sudden tremor shook the palace. Lights flickering under a deep red glow, the Regent appeared on every screen across the capital. His face contorted with fury as he activated the final purge protocol, a catastrophic failsafe designed to wipe out evidence of his lies by destroying the palace, the archives, and thousands of lives in one merciless sweep. His voice roared with madness, declaring that if the Empire could not remain pure under the season law, then it would die with it. The floor beneath Leora's feet vibrated with the rising energy surge building toward destruction. Alarms screamed through every speaker. The shield gone, but now a new danger rising inside the palace heart, and Mason grabbed her hand once more, his voice fierce and urgent as he told her there was only one place she could stop the purge, the throne dais deep in the central command chamber, and she felt the weight of fate settle on her shoulders like a blazing crown, as she realized the next step she took would decide whether her world lived or died. And the choice could not wait, not even for a breath. The palace trembled like a living giant waking in pain, as Princess Leora raced through the collapsing corridors with Mason at her side. Alarms screaming, lights flickering red, the floor shaking as the purge protocol devoured the building from within. Every breath she took tasted like metal and smoke. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown to the end of her world, yet she kept moving because she knew there was no more time to doubt herself. The Regent had chosen destruction over truth, and only she could reach the command dais before the purge detonated into a wave that would burn the capital into ruins. She ran with her cloak torn, her hair wild, her chest tight with fear and resolve woven together, and Mason stayed close, his hand gripping hers through every crash and every shudder of the breaking palace. They reached the central hall as a massive explosion tore through the far wing, sending a blast of wind and debris across the chamber, shards of crystal raining like deadly hail. The great stained glass mural of the season law shattered behind them in a roar of light, its pieces scattering through the air like falling memories of a broken age. The command dais stood ahead, suspended on a rising platform surrounded by sentinel machines that crawled awake with metallic shrieks, their glowing eyes locking onto Leora as threats, their blades unfolding with lethal precision. The Regent's voice echoed through every speaker, warped with fury and fear, calling her a traitor, a corrupt princess, a danger to everything their empire stood for. But his voice only strengthened her resolve, because every step she took toward the dais felt like reclaiming the life and truth he had stolen from generations. Mason stepped in front of her as the first sentinel charged, his body moving with the confidence of countless battles but fueled now by something far stronger than duty. He fought with a desperate intensity, blocking blades, kicking metal frames back into the fire, every movement executed with fierce purpose as he protected Leora through the storm of steel. Rin joined from the side with a roar, blood dripping down his arm but eyes blazing with the fire of someone who refused to let fear write the end of his story. He brought his blade down on a sentinel's spine, sparks bursting like fireflies into the smoke-filled air. Isha scrambled to slice the system's access nodes with her console, her breath quick and shaky, but her hands steady as she fought to keep reinforcements from flooding the chamber, and Elder Mara moved through the chaos with calm eyes, guiding terrified citizens who had rushed into the hall seeking safety, every movement filled with a quiet strength that grounded everyone around her. Leora stepped onto the dais as the floor shook beneath her feet, her fingers trembling as they slid across the glowing control ring, the central crystal pulsing like a heartbeat about to burst. She could feel the purge energy growing inside the palace core. A storm of devastation seconds away from release, the regent's voice grew louder, cracking with desperation as he screamed that love outside the seasons was chaos, that freedom would break their civilization, that hearts were not meant to choose without rules. But Leora lifted her head with tears in her eyes and whispered that a heart without choice was not living at all. It was only surviving, and her voice carried through the chamber with a purity that made even the sentinel machines falter for a breath. She placed her hands on the override sigils, the energy burning her palms, searing through her veins like liquid fire, the dais vibrating as if rejecting her authority, the entire hall shimmering with unstable light. Mason pushed through the last waves of sentinels and reached her, grabbing her shoulders as the energy flared up around her like a storm ready to swallow her whole. She met his eyes, seeing fear and love and unshaken belief reflected in the depths of his gaze, and he whispered the words that steadied her soul, words spoken in a soft voice thick with emotion, telling her that she was stronger than any law, any empire, any lie built across centuries, telling her that she was not alone, not in this moment, not ever. And Leora felt something inside her unlock, a surge of courage blooming like a wildfire. Her fingers pressed deeper into the control ring, and she poured her entire will into the override, her voice rising in a cry that echoed through the hall as she commanded the system to stop. The purge light flared brighter and brighter until the whole world felt blinding. Then with a thunderous crack, the energy collapsed into itself, dissolving into a wave of soft gold that spread through the palace like warm wind, extinguishing the red warning lights, silencing the alarms, calming the trembling walls. The purge was gone, the system defeated, the empire saved from destruction in the final breath before annihilation. Silence fell over the hall, broken only by the heavy breathing of those who had fought. The regent appeared on the main screen, his face pale with disbelief, his authority shattered as every citizen in the chamber stared at him not with fear, but with grief and anger and awakening truth. Kaelor stepped forward from the shadows, bowing not to power but to honesty, declaring before all that the regent had betrayed the people, that the season law was a cage enforced through manipulation and cruelty, and the guards around him slowly lowered their weapons, their loyalty shifting with the tides of truth that now washed through the hall. Leora's voice rose, calm and steady, as she announced the dissolution of the season law, declaring that from this moment forward, partnerships would be built on choice, not cycles, that families would no longer live under fear of punishment for loving freely, that destiny would belong to the people again. Cheers rose slowly, then louder, then erupting into thunder that shook the chamber with hope and rebirth, citizens embracing one another, guards dropping to their knees, elders weeping with joy for a freedom they thought they would never see in their lifetime. Mason took Leora's hand as the hall brightened with the first gentle light of morning spilling through the broken ceiling, the twin moons fading behind a sky being born anew. She leaned into him, exhausted and trembling, and he whispered that this was only the beginning, that a new world needed builders, not rulers. And she smiled softly through her tears as she realized she no longer carried the burden alone. She looked out over her people, her city, her future, and felt her heart open like dawn breaking across an endless desert. Together they stepped forward, hand in hand, standing before a world reborn under the light of freedom. And for the first time in their lives, they breathed as if the air itself was finally theirs to share. Forever, in every season, always.